Good day again, everyone. We are sponsored today and this week by Sally and Ernie Levy, Le'ilish their beloved son, Kobe, Yaakov Nachmiel, Olvashom Ben Sonik Shimon Halevi, Sheyichya, his 29th year to this today, Shamash Leah, sponsored today as well by Han and Brian Katz, Le'ilish Brian's mother, Razel Hilda Bat Binyamin, and Talba Riva, Allah Shalom is to this today, sponsored this week by Luna and Stuart Paul, Le'ilish Yenta Rivka Bat Shmuel, and Yaakov Ben Yitzchak, Aleim Shalom, by Sandy and Steve Gradko, Leidishmat Shraga Feivel Ben Sender and Dina Bat Avraham, by Julie and Richard Ehrlich, Leidishmat Rachel Miriam Bat Yona, by Marceline Weinblatt, Leidishmat Gittel Bat Yechaim Yisachar and Chavriva Bat Aaron Yosef and Bracha, and by Chanyol Fuld, Leidishmat their beloved son Hillel, Ovasham Ben Yo Yaakov Sheyichya. All right, so another interesting Jew. This one right here, his name is Tzvika Vishengrad, and his life story just struck a chord with me. It's just so interesting, even if at the end what he does for a living is not that interesting, but his life story was interesting. He's in his late 50s now, and he grew up in a family of survivors. In fact, he grew up born in Israel. His mother's parents were survivors. She was born in a DP camp after the war, and his grandfather was actually a very noted figure, I suppose. His grandparents were on Schindler's List, and if you remember the end of the movie, someone took out a gold tooth and melted it into a ring in which they wrote on it, Kol hamatzil nefesh achat miYisrael, ke'ilu hitzil olam umiluah. Whoever saves one life in Israel, as if you've saved the entire world. That was his grandfather. His grandfather was a goldsmith. He survived, and they made Aliyah, and they had their children and grandchildren here as well. And he, in fact, Tzvi Vishnegrat, is called by the name. His grandfather was Tzvi as well. So he grew up in Bat Yam, and he said he wasn't really much of a student. He was in, he was out. He even left back one year. And then in high school, he dropped out and went to work with his father. Apparently, metals in the family business. The grandfather was a goldsmith. His father became a locksmith and opened up a locksmith company in Bat Yam. And that was the concern. He went to work there in high school. And suddenly, as he grew up in a religious family, at the end of his high school years, he said to his father, he wants to go to Hesder. And his father's a working man, and he said, "No, it's a waste of time, 5 years." And they got into an argument, and so his father consented, and he went to Yeshiva Hesder in Shiloh. And in the army, he really straightened out. You know, people say the army is, you can't be religious. He became even more religious in the army. He straightened out. While he was in the army, he met his wife. They married all these years. And then afterwards, he went to work in his father's locksmith company. Over time, we realized that from month to month, they're not really making any money. They keep taking out loan after loan. And he would get into these confrontations with his father, and then he couldn't take it anymore. He said, I'm opening up my own business. And he opened up his own locksmith company in Ashdod. His father was furious because now he's even competing. Well, that business failed. And he accumulated a lot of debt, and tail between his legs, he asked a friend, can you go speak to my father? Can I come back? And in fact, he came back, and now he's in his late 30s. In 2004, his father takes ill, diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and Rahman al dies within 6 weeks, and he takes over the business. He takes over the business, and he sees not only does the business have no money, it's not making any money, there's no prospect of making any money, but there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of shekels in debt, in addition to the debt that he had accumulated in his own locksmith business. After thinking about it for a long time, talking with his mother, he closed the business and he filed for bankruptcy. So he filed for bankruptcy. He went to the bankruptcy court. Apparently, it was a very tough judge there, female judge, and she denied him bankruptcy relief, saying to him, Atatzeir midai, you're too young. He had gone to the library to read up on law and find out what he could do to help his father's business, and there he learned the terminology of bankruptcy. She said, Atatzir midai. He knew that's not a factor in bankruptcy, and he appealed to the High Court. And Usher Grunis, whose name has been in the news frequently the last few weeks, former president of the Supreme Court, he ruled in favor of Tzvika Vishnegרד, saying, no, age is not a factor. Anybody of any age should have the right to rehabilitate their financial life. So he granted him relief from his creditors and his father's business as well. During this time, he worked as a seller of vacuum cleaners, as an ambulance driver. He would distribute newspapers early in the morning just to make some money. And at night, he went to law school. And over time, many decades later, or I guess 2 decades later, he once said to his wife, like, how do we survive the turmoil? She was a nurse, the turmoil of not having any money. And she said to him, Lo yashavta yom echad babayit. You never sat even one day at home. You're always doing something. You always said, you're accountable. It's my responsibility to bring home money. I'll do it however I can. Well, in fact, he graduated law school and he decided to become a bankruptcy lawyer. And then he realized that he would go to the Bar Association conferences, and it was all speakers, wealthy lawyers, partners, bankers would come. There was nothing for the common man. He started representing the common man. He was, in fact, the founder of the Israeli Bar Association Committee on Bankruptcy, and then he got involved in politics. He's now a councilman in Petach Tikva, head of the Tzionut Datit. And he said something interesting. And it's a bit of a bleeding heart. We understand that. He said the banks, if someone will come to a bank and say, I could pay 50% of the loan, 200,000 shekels, the bank would say, no, file for bankruptcy. Even if at the end of the process, they only wind up with 10%. Makes no financial sense. I guess there's a logic to it, because if you didn't have to go through the grueling process of bankruptcy, so people would just flippantly decide not to pay their bills. So they want you to go through it, and then even if they get less money at the end, some of it makes sense, some not. But now he's a very successful bankruptcy attorney, a guy who rose from very simple origins. An interesting Jew. Have a good day.